When the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection launched on PC, it didn't quite live up to expectations. Between resolution limitations, missing features, and clunky controls, each game in the collection had its fair share of issues, and I covered them all when it first released. But now, after a handful of updates from Konami, it's time to take another look. In this video, we're revisiting MGS1, MGS2, and MGS3 to see what's changed, what's been fixed, and what problems are still lingering. Has the Master Collection finally become the definitive way to play these classics on PC? Let's find out. Let's start with Metal Gear Solid 1. When the Master Collection launched, this version of MGS1 was severely disappointing. The game was locked to a 240p rendering resolution, the same as the original PlayStation version, and it only supported a 4:3 aspect ratio. On top of that, bilinear filtering was forced on, which made the already low-res image look blurry and soft. There was no option for integer scaling either, which could have helped. The application itself was also locked to 1080p output, so if your monitor wasn't a native 1080p display, the game would forcibly change your desktop resolution when entering full screen. And that wasn't all. Some of the sound effects weren't being emulated accurately. And worst of all, the analog stick didn't even function properly. It just simulated a D-pad, meaning the movement was locked to 8 directions instead of allowing smooth 360-degree control like the original game supported. Back then, I recommended using DuckStation instead, which offered better visual clarity, proper analog controls, and more accurate sound. But now, let's talk about the updates. Here's the current state of the game on version 1.5.0. The resolution is still locked to 240p, and the game still runs in 4:3, but Konami did add some key improvements. There's now an option to turn off the bilinear filtering, so you can finally get a sharp, pixel-perfect image. They also added integer scaling and even a basic scanline filter, which is a nice touch for a CRT-style presentation. The game now supports output resolutions beyond 1080p and scales properly using integer scaling, which means no more forced desktop resolution changes on full screen. Analog controls were finally fixed too. Full analog input is now supported, and a low input lag mode was added as well. That's a big step forward for playability. There's even a mod available that enables widescreen rendering and higher resolutions than 240p, but I wouldn't recommend it just yet. That feature is still very experimental and breaks a lot of parts of the game. So overall, the Master Collection version of MGS1 has seen some real improvements. It's no longer the frustrating, blurry mess it was at launch. That said, DuckStation still offers the better experience overall. You get more control over how the game looks and feels, from PGXP to reduced polygon wobble and texture warping, to increased rendering resolutions and more accurate sound emulation. But for anyone who just wants an easy, no-fuss way to play MGS1 on PC, this updated version in the Master Collection is now a perfectly solid option.
What do you mean? Hey, men aren't allowed in here.
Now let's take a look at Metal Gear Solid 2. Back when the Master Collection launched, this version had a bunch of frustrating limitations. For starters, the rendering resolution was locked to 720p with no option to change it. That's pretty unacceptable for any PC release in 2023, let alone a game as iconic as this. And on top of that, there was no anisotropic filtering setting, so you had to force it manually through your GPU's control panel. Visually, the game still carried over nearly all of the issues from the HD collection, which this version is based on. Particle effects played at double speed, raindrops were almost invisible, and depth of field was barely noticeable, just to name a few. The audio wasn't any better, with noticeable compression artifacts and distortion during cutscenes, making the game sound worse than it should. That said, mods quickly came to the rescue. MGS HD Fix allowed you to unlock the resolution and play at any setting, including 4K, and enabled anisotropic filtering, among other improvements. There was also the MGS2 MC Better Audio mod, which replaced the compressed audio files with higher quality versions. Back then, my recommendation was to install those mods and stick with this version for the best PC experience. while PCSX2 emulation was still the better pick for purists who wanted the original look and feel. Now let's talk about the updates. Konami finally added resolution settings, but in a really strange and limited way. You can now choose between 720p or 1080p rendering resolutions. And then, on top of that, there are upscaling options for 1440p and 4K using AMD's FSR1. So yes, they technically made changes to support other resolutions, but then arbitrarily locked users into only 2 base resolutions and forced the rest through FSR upscaling. And this doesn't make any sense. Clearly, the engine is capable of rendering at other resolutions. So why not let players pick native resolutions for their displays? Some have speculated that the resolution limits are due to the fact that certain effects, like raindrops or depth of field, are tied to the rendering resolution and would look even worse at higher settings. That might be true, but it's also kind of missing the point. Those effects are already broken. Even at 720p, they don't look anywhere near how they did on the PS2. Locking down the resolution just to preserve broken effects isn't a fix, it's a band-aid. Konami really should have reworked those effects to behave consistently at any resolution. The upscaling options also rely on FSR1, which isn't exactly the best upscaling option. So you end up with a smoothed-over image that's still lacking visual clarity. They did add AI upscale versions of the pre-rendered cutscenes, which is a nice touch, but again, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There's still no built-in anisotropic filtering, so MGS HD fix or driver overrides are still required. And most of the original visual issues from the HD collection remain untouched. As for the audio, Konami didn't change a thing, but thankfully, the better audio mod still works and continues to be a must-have. So, unfortunately, this version hasn't seen the meaningful improvements we hoped for. It's still very much reliant on community mods to reach its full potential. That said, with those mods in place, this is still the recommended way to play MGS2 on PC, just not thanks to Konami. In fact, modders have recently fixed a couple of major issues inherited from the HD collection. With the latest version of MGS HD Fix, the raindrops and other vector-based effects are no longer tied to the resolution and look great even in 4K. Not only that, skyboxes now render correctly, which makes a big difference in cutscenes like this one at the beginning of the planned chapter. So yeah, with the mods, this version is now even better and closer to the PS2 original. And for those who want a purer, more faithful experience, PCSX2 still remains your great alternative. And finally, let's talk about Metal Gear Solid 3. Just like MGS2, the Master Collection version of MGS3 launched with a pretty disappointing list of issues, many of which were already known from the HD Collection days. First off, the game was also locked to 720p resolution, with no way to change it. That's a glaring flaw for any modern PC release, and it's especially frustrating considering how beloved and visually detailed this game is. There was also no anisotropic filtering setting, just like MGS2. As for the visuals, most of the same HD Collection quirks were still here, like nearly invisible raindrops and a very diminished depth of field effect. Thankfully, unlike MGS2, this HD version of MGS3 didn't suffer from quite as many problems. But the ones that did carry over still made the game feel like a downgrade from the original PS2 experience in some important areas. The audio quality was also a big issue. Just like with MGS2, heavy compression made the cutscenes sound distorted and lower quality than they should. And on top of all that, this version, like the HD Collection, was missing a couple of unique pieces of content from the PS2 original. Namely, the Snake vs. Monkey minigame and the Guy Savage Nightmare sequence. These weren't just little extras. They were fun and memorable parts of the original release, and their absence still stings. That said, just like with MGS2, the community stepped in with mods to fix some of these problems. MGS HD Fix once again enabled high resolutions like 4K and added essential tweaks, while the MGS3 MC Better Audio mod cleaned up the heavily compressed cutscene audio. So at launch, my verdict was the same as with MGS2. This version with mods is the best way to play MGS3 on PC. PCSX2 remained the go-to option for purists or anyone who wanted to play the missing content. Now, After Konami's updates, well, things haven't changed much. They added the same baffling resolution settings for MGS2. You can choose between 720p and 1080p for rendering, with upscaling options to 1440p and 4K using FSR1, which again raises the same question. If the game engine can render at 1080p, why not allow users to pick any resolution? Why restrict the options like this? They also added AI upscale versions of the pre-rendered cutscenes, just like in MGS2, which is a decent visual improvement, but it doesn't fix the core issues. Nisotropic filtering is still missing from the in-game settings, so MGS HD fix is still necessary if you want sharper textures. The audio compression, still untouched. Missing PS2 content, still not back. And nearly all of the original HD collection visual issues remain as they were. So unfortunately, this version of MGS3 is in the exact same boat as MGS2. Konami's updates didn't go far enough, and once again, it's the modding community doing the heavy lifting. Still, with those essential mods in place, this version remains the best way to play MGS3 on PC, especially now that the raindrop issue has been fixed with MGS HD Fix. Just don't expect any of the PS2 exclusive extras unless you're willing to dive into PCSX2. So, after all these updates, where does that leave the Master Collection on PC? Well, Metal Gear Solid 1 has seen the biggest improvement. It's still not on par with emulation through DuckStation, but it's now a perfectly solid option for casual play and far more accessible than emulation. MGS 2 and 3, not so much. Konami's updates feel like half measures. Some quality of life options were added, but the core issues remain untouched. Thankfully, the mods still work, and they're still essential if you want to get the most out of these ports. So the verdict hasn't really changed. These versions can be great with a little help from the community, but without mods, they still feel like missed opportunities. Still, let's hope Konami has taken the feedback and does a better job with the second volume of the collection. And in the meantime, the MGS3 remake comes out in August, and it's looking really good, so I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe for more. Also, please consider supporting me on Patreon. And if you want to get in touch with me, follow me on X. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.